want to get right to the core. So you want to know what it's all for. So you want to come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by Gorge. So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by Gorge. Podcast by Gorge. Podcast by Gorge. He knows what he's fighting for. It's Podcast by Gorge. Podcast by Gorge. Want to know what we're fighting for.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another Podcast by Gorge, and it's all politics today, so if you can't stand politics, you might want to let this one go. But if you're interested in what's going on, and you ought to be, as Stephen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University, says, if you say you don't like politics, beware, because politics likes you. It's connected to everything that we're experiencing, and a lot of what we're experiencing in this country ain't good, folks, and we've got some approaches to our problems, let's say, presented by the respective national conventions of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, we've already talked about the DNC to a certain length here on the podcast, and the Republicans are having their convention right now. And so I thought, well, who better to have on Podcast by Gorge than Todd Blodgett? He's an author. He's the author of this book, Republican Crackhead, just off my left side here. We discussed that on the podcast. Go back and check that in the archive if you haven't seen it, because it's fascinating, his experience. And I want to give his bio here so that you understand a little bit more about Todd and where he's coming from. Now, it says Todd Blodgett is an American conservative Republican political writer. He served as a member of the White House staff of President Ronald Reagan and on the Bush-Quayle Election Committee. Following the 1988 presidential election, Blodgett, who was a protege of the late Lee Atwater, then served on the staff of the Republican National Committee, where he worked until 1991. So he knows something about what's going on. He was a one-time co-owner and operator of Resistance Records. That's the world's largest neo-Nazi music label. And of course, that's because of his work, or how it's all connected with his undercover work with the FBI. And he's worked full-time as a paid informant for the FBI. So that's important. And with the FBI, he was assigned to infiltrate and surveil neo-Nazis, KKK members, fascist skinheads, professional anti-Semites, and Holocaust deniers in the United States, Europe, Canada, and the Caribbean. So, Todd, welcome back to a Podcast by Gorge. It's good to see you, pal.
Thanks, George. Great to be here.
Well, you know, that perspective, that background that you have, and we talked about that on the earlier podcast, you're particularly well suited to kind of analyze, dissect, and take a look at what's going on around our country right now. And it's on, it's front row and center at the Republican National Convention. And that's what the Democrats are calling protests. It's what the Republicans are calling riots. Now, Todd, I got to tell you, and we'll talk about it later, to me, this isn't that complicated. Here's the way that I look at it, and I've explained it before, my take on these, and it is there are people that want to gather, large crowds of people that justifiably want to gather in these cities, most notably now up there in Kenosha, Wisconsin, to protest actions by the police and by their government. When that happens, anytime you get a lot of people together on the street, here comes the boogaloos, or whatever you want to call them, the anarchists, the people that want to use that as a launching pad, as a springboard to tear shit up, to burn stuff down, to start all over again. Who knows what their agenda is? They can't even tell you what it is. But you can't cross-pollinate the two. You can't blame the protesters. They've got a First Amendment right to do that. That has to be protected. Police, right, if they're going to do something on site, they need to do something about these. I don't know if they're Antifa, because Antifa isn't even organized. I don't know. Well, that's a long beginning for me. Give us your take on this now, because it's important. It's what they're talking about at the RNC.
Right. I mean, there's no question. We've got to protect the right of peaceful protesters to air their grievances. And there are legitimate grievances these people have. Look what happened to Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis and other places. Look what happened the other night in Kenosha with Mr. I believe it was Jacob Blake, I think his name is.
Yes.
Awful. At the same time, there is some degree in some cities like Portland and a few others that there have been some violence, which cannot be, they're trying to burn down courthouses and set police stations afire. That's got to be dealt with as well. This thing in Kenosha with this kid named Kyle Rittenhouse really bothers me because aside from the fact he shot 2 people, he was actually embraced by the local law enforcement, the county sheriffs, the police. They handed him bottles of water, thanked him for his service before he did this. This comports exactly with the white supremacy handbook. And what I mean by that is this. I attended seminars conducted by people like Willis Carto, Pastor Richard Butler, William Pierce, Tom Metzger, Ed Fields. These people, the professional haters, would indoctrinate young people back in the 90s and the 2000s, early 2000s, into doing exactly what this kid did. They said, join a law enforcement group. The kid joined a cadet corps. Don't buy foreign-made weapons like an AK-47, that's a Kalashnikov. Get the American equivalent AR-15 manufactured by Colt. Try to blend in. And of course he did. He projected a very calm appearance. He was on a video saying, I'm here to help. I don't want to hurt anybody. And then he goes and kills 2 people. Or I think he killed 2 and shot a third, or killed 1 and shot 2. I'm not sure. But he's basically comporting precisely with what these people would say and do say at seminars. And of course, he might be a self-indoctrinator who logged on to a hateful website and just basically brainwashed himself into this, because with the internet now, you can, especially with the deep web, not the regular web, the deep web, these guys, and they're mostly all guys, can get on there and learn the same stuff that was taught back in the 80s, 90s, and the first 10 years of this decade, 15 years of this decade, by people like Carto and the David Duke accolades. That's what he did.
So, that brings me to the question. Everything you say sounds completely accurate and reasonable, and I know that it is because of your experience and background. You're Republican. But I got to tell you something, Todd. I turn on the convention and I talk to Republicans, and they don't care about protecting people's First Amendment rights. They don't believe there are protests going on. They believe these are riots, and they need to shut these things down, haul these people off to jail, lock them up. I mean, that's what they want to do. Where do you come down on that?
I would come down the middle. I would say, obviously, anybody, whether they're like this guy like Rittenhouse, even before they get violent, fatally violent, or the minority, I'm going to call the minority violent people. There are violence on both sides. Hate to use that phrase, but the thing is, anyone that's violent needs to be arrested and locked up, no matter what their motivation is. No matter their motivation, if they're going to be, hurting people, killing people, trying to set police stations afire, that kind of thing, arrest them, lock them up. We've got to preserve the right to protest. What we saw at the Republican convention was what I'm going to call effectively Reagan-esque pageantry on the surface and Nixonian calculation on the interior, on the inside. You saw a Reaganite type attempt to make like Reagan's '84 convention, Morning in America. That was orchestrated by my old buddy Mike Deaver, who was an expert at that kind of stuff. Yet, underneath it all, they were basically painting Mondale as the same as Nixon had painted George McGovern in '72. And sure enough, the exact result, 49 states for both incumbents.
Yeah, they're telling us that that you can't vote for Biden because that's a vote for the mob. It's a vote for the radical left. I mean, I find that ironic, Todd, because you and I talk a lot, and I'm left of the Democratic Party, and Joe Biden is so much, there's nothing left about that guy. I mean, he's been described as a moderate Republican. His policies and programs, I think, would have fit very well into the Reagan era that you're talking about. And then I'm going to put this, and we're talking about politics, and I'm going to put this map up, or this chart up, and I've had this up before, and it shows you what is happening. The 2016 election was very close. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Donald Trump won in the Electoral College. We're going to talk about that. But because of that, the Democrats know all they've got to do is swing a few votes. And my God, it's just a few thousand in some of these swing state areas. Get a few of these people that voted for Trump on the Republican side to come over to their side, and they'll win. They're playing political chess. They didn't even, it's 3D chess, which is kind of a joke. I mean, it's almost checkers, for God's sake. It's so basic and simplistic. And I look at that and say, my God, with everything that's going on in the world, with this cataclysmic climate catastrophe that we have, with 50 million people unemployed and without health care, and with these riots taking place and police shootings and on and on and on, we turn to the Democrats for some programs and policies, and they don't give us any of that stuff. Instead, what they do is they roll out kind of moderate Republicans, guys like, I don't know, John Kasich, Meg Whitman, Colin Powell, for God's sake. Todd, I'm telling you, I'm watching Joe Biden, and I'm thinking, God, make me forget about the Iraq War. Make me forget about the Iraq War. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about Joe Biden's role in that. And they bring out Colin Powell. I mean, the guy is largely responsible for that. He made that appearance before the UN. He had a vial of anthrax in his pocket. He had satellite photos of ice cream trucks moving through the streets of Baghdad that he said were hauling tubes of uranium nuclear stuff. It's just craziness of what the Democrats are doing. But they're trying to steal a few of these Republicans. Okay, so then I turn on the RNC this week and I think, okay, if I was a Republican, what I would be doing was I would be stealing the opportunity to reach into this non-voting segment that I showed earlier on this chart, to get some of those people that have been disenfranchised to come on board and vote for the Republicans. So I would be reaching out with, again, programs and policies that would appeal to them. No, they're rolling out the crazy train, Todd. I mean, they couldn't be speaking to me anyway, more to their base, more to the kind of the nutty fringe part of the Republican Party than they are at this Republican National Convention. So it looks to me like it's going to be just like it was in 2016 on the Republican side, just like it was on the Democratic side. Who's going to win bringing those swing voters in those Rust Belt states on board? And it in 2016, it was Trump. And you believe it could be Trump again in 2020?
I do. Let me first address the speakers. There were a number of speakers there that were real people with real concerns. There was a kind of a dichotomy in the speaking order. You had Melania Trump, Karen Pence, and others that basically talked about, Trump behind the scenes. They were basically nonpartisan, that kind of thing. The main target of those speakers is the suburban female resident who don't want to be led to believe or don't want to think they're going to vote for a big. It's not the black voters. It's not the black voters, even though we had a number of very excellent black speakers. The Attorney General down in Kentucky, Cameron, I forget his last, Daniel Cameron. You had Senator Tim Scott. You had John Ponder, the man who was pardoned. That was a very emotional. It was probably inappropriate to do a pardon at a convention, not even probably, but that's Trump for you. I mean, these people that make fun of Trump for being a reality TV show host forget that such experience is highly conducive to winning elections.
They're playing right into his hands. Then of course, yeah,
right. But you had the lobster fisherman that that was grateful for the thing. You'll notice these speakers were disproportionately from places like Michigan and Minnesota, Wisconsin. Blue collar workers. These are real people with real concerns. As to your comment about how the Democrats are kind of in a position where they're playing chess or even 3D chess, you're right about that. It's a very nuanced thing. You got a flip of 40,000 votes spread over Wisconsin. Notice I said a flip, not a total vote. There were 77,000 votes collectively that gave Trump Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. If you had flipped 40,000 of those, Hillary would have won all three of those states. And she had to win all three to win. So Trump has some cushion there. But while the Democrats are chess players and good chess players, Trump's a poker player. You got chess players up against a poker player. This is a guy, there's no finesse there. There's a lot of calculation that's very effective. And he proved that last time when he knocked off 16 Republicans and knocked off Hillary. They're playing chess. He is a poker player that knows how to shove everything he's got in the middle of the table and bet on I think that his decades in the public eye, his experience is not unlike Reagan's. People made fun of Reagan for being a guy that made movies in World War II, whereas Trump never served in the military. He was a guy that, was a host of GE Theater and a movie star and all that. He probably had the best resume to be a candidate for president than anybody in the 20th century. Trump, I think, exceeds the ability of Reagan in that regard. So I think that you got chess players up against a high stakes poker guy.
And this thing about the Hatch Act, honest to God, I call Trump the pull my finger president. It's almost exactly what he's doing. I think it plays right into his hand, his poker hand, so to speak, because the Democrats and the corporate media today, they're running around screaming about this stuff. My God, 99.9% of America does not care about that kind of crap at all. They view that as inside politics. They view that as using the vagaries of the law to affect the outcome of the election. And I think that actually helps Trump. Give up on that crap. And I'm offended as a Democrat, but again, I'm a lefty kind of a guy. I'm a progressive. I think we need programs and policies like we've never needed them before. The DNC obviously disagrees. That in their convention, it was don't rock the boat, speak in platitudes, talk about how nice a guy Joe Biden is, and most and foremost, how much we hate Donald Trump. If we can hate him, not 100%, but 110% in these blue states. And then if just enough to swing a few thousand of these swing voters, then we'll win the election. And that's all we want to do. And whether or not these problems that are plaguing us, that are killing us, not figuratively, but literally, they're not addressing those. And again, I was kind of shocked at the Republican approach, but I guess you would say, and having been involved in these conventions are not meant to solve problems. They're meant to solidify the base, to get the ball rolling, to make sure that you've got everybody on board. And that's really what they're doing. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that's the intent, but to the extent that the base was solidified, there's no doubt that Joe Biden is a nice guy. He was presented as such, and accurately so, and the base is solidified. But the only thing to ask when analyzing the efficacy of any campaign event for anyone's candidacy, especially with a convention like this, did it move more votes toward you and away from your opponent, or at least into the undecided column, than it did the other way around? I think so far from what I've seen, I watched all the Democratic convention and I've watched every night of the Republican convention. So far, the Republicans have played offense way better than the Democrats have. They were able to basically smooth over some things with Trump that will appeal to, I think, just enough suburbanites, especially the females, college-educated females who, by the way, in the last election did go for Trump by 51%. I can see that number going up this time because they don't want this stuff coming there. They're scared about that. Remember, a recent poll by the Cato Institute, which turns out good poll, said that 62% of Americans have hold political views they're afraid to discuss with their friends and co-workers and neighbors and all that. In some cases, their spouses. With conservatives, that number shoots up to 77%. I think that the tailoring of the message and the message that got across to the Democrats really puts Joe Biden right now in I'm going to call it a Dewey-esque position. Tom Dewey was 15 points ahead of Harry Truman into September. The pollsters stopped polling. Truman got out there and started talking about issues that he knew resonated with voters that provided him the victory. The Democrats are making a mistake if they think Biden can avoid certain issues like the rioting and the solutions to it, the issue of China. These people are talking about these issues. If he thinks he can sit on his lead and wait it out and play out the clock and win the election, I think he'll be proven wrong.
Well, and I'll just wrap up here a little bit by saying, again, it seems like my wife's on me all the time because it seems like I'm picking on the Democrats, but God, it gyrated me. AOC, the rising star on the progressive side, although I really don't know if she is. She seems to be coming under the thumb of Nancy Pelosi. She got 90 seconds at the Democratic convention. Tulsi Gabbard, first time in history, a presidential candidate with delegates was not allowed to speak at the convention. And man, I like Tulsi Gabbard. That offended me. And then I look at the Republican National Convention again. I don't know what you guys are doing. I don't know. It's depressing for me. But before we leave now, Todd, you just did an op-ed piece and you went through the detailed, and it's easier to see in print. But if you can give us the highlights again of how you see this potential win by Trump based on what's happening on the Electoral College map.
Right, and that's all that matters, as we all know. I could see Joe Biden winning by as much as 5.5 to 6 million popular votes. He could basically double Hillary's margin, and that's based on the improvements the Democrats made in the 2018 elections. They have a very good get out the vote program. There's hatred toward Trump that impels voters toward the Democrats, as proven in the last election. However, it won't matter if he runs up enormous margins in states like Illinois, New York, California, Massachusetts, etc., and even respectful margins in Oregon, and Hawaii and other states. Because as long as Trump can hold on to the edge he had last time, and even he could actually lose Pennsylvania and Michigan, and as long as he holds Wisconsin and the district in Maine he still wins. He could lose Wisconsin, any combination of those three, he could lose two of them. I also think there's an even chance right now that Trump could win Minnesota because of what's going on up there. My point is, though, that Donald Trump understands as well as any president, if not better, that all that matters is the Electoral College. In the last election, he was noticeably absent from California, New York, Illinois. He didn't go to those states. He didn't even mess with them, nor did Mike Pence. Whereas Kane and Hillary were going to Beverly Hills for fundraisers and back to Chicago, and Kane went back to Virginia where he'd been the governor, a successful governor. They wasted their time there. They also ignored Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which they're not going to do this time. The question is, though, are they going to be able to get past the criticism that Trump will make of their message? Trump's going to basically say, I'm America's defender. You're at risk with this guy here. And so far, I have not seen the Democrats fighting back on that. They're acting, McGovern at least tried to fight back, but he couldn't beat Nixon. Mondale tried, but he couldn't beat Reagan. Biden is not making that effort. And remember something else. Former vice presidents, or even incumbent vice presidents, if they're Democrats, do not do well in elections. Look at Hubert Humphrey. Look at Walter Mondale. Now look at Joe Biden. I mean, my point is, you've had other vice presidents. Look, Dan Quayle ran. The only one since 1836 to win was
Nixon.
George H.W. one term. Well, Nixon was a former vice president who came back in '68 after losing in '60.
Yeah,
that's true. Nixon did. And Gerald Ford, of course, became president, but he fumbled it away once he had it. But as a general rule, former vice presidents, with the exception of Nixon, because Bush was an incumbent vice president, don't do very well in presidential elections. It's proven by the ones that have run and lost.
Well, I got to tell you, and we'll wrap it up here. Again, when I looked at the Democrat, and I watched it more closely, the Democratic National Convention, I looked at Biden's speech, I looked at Kamala Harris, I looked at some of these other people. It was transparent. I could see through it easily. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not the most astute political observer. I'm kind of offended by that, Todd. I got to tell you, that insults my intelligence a little bit. I watched the speech by Harris in particular. My God, I haven't seen anything like that since Pete Buttigieg. I mean, down on the farm, we call that talking all the time and never saying anything. And that's not by accident. That's by design. They're doing that on purpose. And by God, this is not the time for that. I took offense to that. Now, as a Republican, you're watching the RNC. You can see through what they're doing. You see the gamesmanship that's going on. You see the 2D chess, the 3D chess, whatever you want to call it. Are you not somewhat offended by that as far as your intellect is concerned?
I recognize the pageantry, which is just BS stuff, has to happen. Believe me, I saw it with Reagan. I saw it with Bush, both Bushes. There is that degree of pageantry, so a level of cynicism that I don't like. I agree with you about that. I'm just saying that basically the Republicans are better at that right now, from what I've seen, than the Democrats, because all that matters is, does it move votes? And on the issues that Trump ran on, Israel, border security, pro-life, judges, law and order, the Second Amendment, he is holding his base, and the convention I saw so far is conducive to transcending it just enough in the right states that I think, while you might lose the popular vote again, not that that's relevant, I think that if I were to bet right now in the next 66 days, I do think that Trump will hold the Electoral College edge based on that. Yeah, it is offensive to see some of the stuff. A lot of people say this is a makeover, an attempted makeover kind of thing. And to a degree it is. but they're trying to basically smooth off the rough edges, as Deaver did with Reagan in '84. And because remember, Reagan was the guy that shortly before his convention, didn't think he was on the air for a Saturday radio broadcast and said, "My fellow Americans, I just signed legislation to outlaw Russia. We begin bombing in 5 minutes." Yeah. And it was like, oh no. So he did this kind of stuff too, but they were so good at smoothing it over and taking the battle to Mondale. As I'm seeing right now, I'm seeing the same mistakes the Democrats made with Mondale happening right now. They think they can, Mondale never had a lead, but they didn't really take the fight to the people, and Reagan did, and Trump is too.
Well, it's obviously going to be more of the same if you get Trump, and that's what incumbency is all about. That's what people are voting for. Actually, I look at the Democrats, and you sit there and tell me what an antichrist Donald Trump is, and he must be defeated at all cost, and then you don't come up with any programs or policies that would get the Democrat elected. The things that the Democrats want, like Medicare for all, Green New Deals, hell, even legalized marijuana. Medicare for all, if Trump or if Biden were to come out and say, I'd provide that during the length of the pandemic, that alone would probably get him elected, but he won't do it. It violates the interest of the donors, and I think that's reprehensible. I mean, it really bugs me. But in final here, just so we're clear, the way that I'm putting it to people, I'm not pledging support. I'm not blue no matter who. I'm not answering pollsters. Maybe I'm playing a little of that polling gamesmanship you talked about earlier, because I'm not happy with Biden, his programs, and his policies. At this stage, I'm not going to do that. I want him to move left. I want him to come over here and deliver on some of these programs. Now, will I vote for Biden in November? Well, okay, yeah. Probably I'll come kicking and screaming. I'm just not telling them that now. And I'm telling people that after he's elected, if he's elected, then we got to get in the streets. We got to do some things. We got to be active like we never have before. Somebody's got to light a fire under his ass to do stuff that he's never done in a 50-year legislative career almost. And as far as Trump is concerned, I understand you're still Trump leaning. It sounds to me like that's where your vote's going to go.
Yeah, I am going to vote for Trump. Obviously, he's not a Ronald Reagan. I'm just concerned about some of the issues that I think would be happening. Keep this in mind: if Harry Truman were alive, if John F. Kennedy were alive, based on what we know about their views, they would not be supporting Biden-Harris.
Well, yeah, John Kennedy, Truman, they were both Medicare for all guys. They've been talking about this stuff, my God, for 60 years, literally. And Joe Biden just said if Medicare for all was passed by both the House and the Senate, if that bill came across his desk, he would veto it. Honest to God, John Kennedy and Harry Truman. That's an excellent point. Todd, I really appreciate it, pal. And again, I try to be neither side news. I like to show both sides of this equation. Sometimes I think we got more in common than we do in difference. And I wish more of America was like this. Thanks, pal, for coming back on a podcast by George. Thank you, George. It's always a pleasure. We'll get back to him again. We still got like 3 months to go. You have to roll out my calendar here and count the days. Yeah.
2 months, actually. Wow.
2 months. Yeah. And that's right. Here we are, the end of August. But we'll come back to Todd, and we'll continue to cover this. And folks, if you like this kind of dialogue, if you like this conversation, which you do not see much of on the corporate news media, you don't see both sides presented, and you sure don't have time to see it on the nightly news. That ain't happening. But if you like it here, go to podcastbygorge.com, click on the badge of the platform that you'd like to follow the podcast on, and get each and every episode. But that's going to wrap it up for today. That's going to be the end of this episode, and we'll be back with you very soon. That's another podcast by George.